All right, Martha and the Vandals. That was a song that was spinning around in my head as a result of ever since Inauguration Day, and happened to have been co-written by Marvin Gaye, who of course is the patron saint of this show. And I thought it would be a nice little change for our guest today. That we usually start out with inner city blues, make you want to holler. But I wanted to start on a little bit of an up note here with our guest again, returning guest, Dr. Clarence Taylor, who's a graduate of Baruch and the CUNY Graduate Center, and also has, or excuse me, Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center. He taught at Baruch and the CUNY Graduate Center and has published many books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 21st Century. Welcome back, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
And so I said, I wanted you back after the inauguration, after everything shook out. And I guess that was a joke when you had emailed back and saying like, will we have anything to talk about?
Right.
so much has happened.
Yes.
And for folks who haven't, who may not have watched before some of our other shows, I brought you in to kind of take the pulse of the role that the Black Lives Matter movement had played in electing Biden. And then we've been kind of watching to see what role folks from that particular group would be playing in the administration. So I think that's certainly something that we can talk about today, as well as a lot of the other things that have happened. I think in particular, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how differently the January 6th event was handled by police and security and the military, as opposed to the way that many of the, for example, Black Lives Movement protests have been handled, and how the folks who participated in that were treated. It would have been a very different affair if the Capitol were full of folks from the Black Lives Movement, as opposed to what we saw on the 6th. But I mean, first impressions. Where are you in as far as how things have shaken out thus far?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you 100%. That it would have been a different response, and that is one of the contributions of the Black Lives Matter movement. All these people who have criticized Black Lives Matter, calling it a racist movement, noting using the phrase "all lives matter," and of course, "blue lives matter." What January 6th did was sort of pull off the cover and demonstrated what folks have been saying for centuries in this country. That Black people are devalued. Joy Reid from MSNBC said it best about the relationship between the police and white America. She said, white people don't have to be afraid of the police even when they are committing insurrection.
Yeah,
I mean, demonstrated.
It was fascinating how, these people were like moving. I mean, what the cameras were showing us, what we've gotten to see is that even after, I mean, I remember when the curfew had been called, and there were folks that the police were kind of like moving them all, kind of slowly encroaching on, like reducing the space that they could occupy, and people were still being belligerent. They weren't leaving. And I mean, I was thinking to myself, I'm saying, like, I don't get it. They're now they've officially committed a crime, as far as the, not observing the curfew. So what are they waiting for?
Yeah. And it's I just read over the weekend that the FBI and the Justice Department are debating, should we prosecute all these folks, because they said we'll have a problem with the courts being overcrowded. We're just going to sort of overload the court system. And so I said this would not have been a question
Right.
if it were Black folks who had committed insurrection. And I heard some really silly commentary while watching this. One person, David Ignatius from the Washington Post, who made the claim that the Capitol Police didn't want to look like they were taking on a military effort, so that's why they sort of backed down. And then he followed up by saying, "Law enforcement will get it done." Well, we must have been watching two different events, because law enforcement did not get it done, unless he meant that many law enforcement officers were going to assist the insurrectionists. And that's what I saw. Yeah, I saw loads of folks being, people from law enforcement, everyone saw them being attacked and beaten, the ones who were attempting to do their job. But the selfies, the opening the door, standing by and letting these folks just run rampant was quite disturbing. And the fact that there were law enforcement people among the insurrectionists has to be quite disturbing. In addition, retired military folks among the insurrectionists. So this was January 6th will definitely stand out in American history, but I think we got to be careful, because some people are attempting to push this argument. This is not who we are. This is sort of an aberration. Well, if you go back in history, look, say, well, no, it really isn't an aberration. In fact, you can look at current events and saw that there was an occupation of state houses, right? The Michigan State House, for example, by the Boogaloo movement and other militias. In addition, I think it's important to, yes, we didn't have this insurrection at the Capitol, but we can go back and look at history and see that there have been mobs organized that have invaded public spaces, with the intention, like these folks did on January 6th, to kill people, to lynch them, because these folks on January 6th did have nooses. They did have all types of weapons, and they made it very clear that they wanted to kill members of us. So if you turn around and look at, people that go back and look in history, yeah, well, we also see this when people are being taken out of, Black people are being taken out of jails under false narratives, mutilated, right? Bodies being taken off. And in this case, these folks also were acting under a false narrative, the big lie, right? That this was a stolen. But the reality, these folks were attempting to do what others did in the past in terms of the lynch mob, and that is take away the votes, and particularly of Black people. Trump and his legal team attempted to throw out in Philadelphia, right, Atlanta, and Detroit, and Flint. This is where they were challenging.
Right.
In their court proceedings, they were challenging, and those are mostly, predominantly Black communities, so Black votes they were trying to do away with, and they couldn't do it in the courts. They couldn't do it on the floor of the Congress when 147 Republicans wanted to push the big lie, and a number of senators, including Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, pushed the big lie, and so they couldn't get it done there. So the other way it was getting it done was just simply to send out a lynch mob to stop the legal counting of the votes. So yeah, we can go back in history and look at the sort of tactic.
Yeah, I
And
mean, well, I just think it's kind of interesting. It's like it's only a race riot when it's people of color that are engaging in the act. And I mean, one of the cases I remember is Tulsa in the early part of the 20th century, where the white community, armed to the teeth, went through the streets, shooting and killing, people of color. And it's like this part of history that people don't. I ran. I was, I can't. I was out at a restaurant. I live in Connecticut. Okay, so you can imagine, in areas that are kind of retirement communities, kind of vacation communities. And there's an young African American man who was my bartender, and we're in this kind of club along the water where boats come in and stuff. And I can't remember how it came up, but I started telling him about the Tulsa riot, and he looked at me as if, I had three heads, like he'd never heard about it. He was kind of, and I think part of it too, what caught him off guard is that, he's surrounded by, white people, so suddenly you think, you to come to that realization and suddenly realize that, how vulnerable you are and can be, was frightening to him. And there was a part of me that felt bad, but a part of me that felt like, you need to know this story, that what people are capable of. And so, yeah, it was a very sad moment. And I just remember watching it, especially like watching people, I guess they had some sort of live video feeds from inside. You could watching people traipsing around the place, this kind of like holy ground of the democracy, and just kind of, walking around, not really. Thank God they were. Seems like once they got in, they really didn't know what to do with themselves, particularly when they couldn't get their hands on the ballots or any of the representatives. They seemed disorganized at that point. But I mean, it almost brought me to tears. I'll be straight with you. It was a traumatizing moment, and probably one that I'll probably never forget.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and a lot of the violence we haven't seen at this moment, because they were just wrecking people's offices. But I would just have a little different take in calling this a riot. I would say this was it was an organized insurrection. And we know, we're beginning to see and hear how well organized these people were. And I know there's investigation going on about this, but the fact that, you had people who were on tours the day before the insurrection, they knew how to get to certain offices. I heard Jim Clyburn note that Representative Jim Clyburn from South Carolina said he has two offices, one with his name on it and another one not known by the public, where he spends a lot of his time. He said they didn't go to the office where his name was. They went to the office where he spends time.
Right.
So someone had to direct them.
It was an inside job.
Yeah. It's
an inside job. And those are the folks I'd like to get my hands on. I mean, when I start thinking about the way these people behaved, I want to, there's a part of me that wants to get medieval. I mean, my dad, I mean, I'm Cuban American. My father they were exiles. And my dad was not a nice guy and was involved in a lot of union stuff in Cuba and political things. And, his temper sometimes resides in me, and his ideas of what he'd like to do when people behave certain ways. It comes out. So there's a part of me, that is not happy with these folks. And I was thinking to myself, the vengeance is mine. This whole idea, like, for example, if the former president is not convicted for these crimes or his role in the insurrection, it'll be what the universe has in store for him. But personally, I'd like, I have very dark ideas.
Yes, well, yes, a lot of folks do, but especially when it comes to Trump. But one of the other things that I heard, one of the comments that Ignatius and others have made, is that Trumpism is over, and I don't see that.
Yeah,
I don't see Trumpism.
yeah, exactly. I think he tapped into something that's always been there, and it's just a matter of somebody else, And you see a lot of people jockeying for that position. I mean, how they're slowly, like their refusal to convict, their refusal to, like you said, prosecute these folks. They want to take advantage of this lobby that's still there. And so, yeah, I'm fearful of who's going to try to push the buttons next time.
Yeah, that's right. Because someone will, if Trump doesn't, because it doesn't look like he's going to be convicted in the Senate,
No.
so he can run again. But if he doesn't, you'll have someone else who'll probably be a lot smarter, but nevertheless will will have the same fascist mentality, and
Right.
will be willing to use that coalition that he brought together.
Right.
And that coalition is important. So people are sort of surprised when he won in 2016, and I keep saying this over and over again. You shouldn't be surprised, because what you were doing was missing an important element
Right.
in America. All right. So, when they talk about the Republican Party, they talk about a coalition of neoconservatives, Christian people, the Christian right, along with libertarians. And I said, well, there's one other element that clearly moved into the Republican Party, and that was the white nationalists and white supremacists. And Trump was constantly reaching out to them. And so politicians will say, yeah, look, we can do that also. We will continue to do that.
Yeah,
We know that's an important element.
Here's the formula. And well, I don't know how much we want. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about now about the Biden administration.
Sure.
And how he's slowly building his cabinet and his staff, and he, suppose I don't know if it's to the point yet, but where he's written more presidential, signed more presidential mandates or whatever than Trump gave pardons. They keep coming out. There's a lot of work he's doing.
Oh, the executive orders, yes.
Yeah, executive orders. Excuse me. And so here the question becomes again, and people have asked this question. So African American community and Black Lives Matter got him elected. And that's kind of, everybody agrees that the African American vote made the difference. And in fact, I want to, I feel like giving, like, everybody in Georgia who voted for those two senators needs to get like a presidential medal of honor for that as well, so that we can at least maintain control of the Senate. But so now we're on the other side of it. What do you see with the Biden administration as far including folks that helped him get there? How do you see that? What do you see? What are you seeing in the creation of that administration?
Well, it's obviously a great relief that Trump no longer is in office. Joe Biden is a guy who, has an interesting past too, right? He's a guy who was the architect of the crime bill. He is a guy who has pushed strong neoliberal policies, including acts that's a bankruptcy act, that went after working class people, but this is a different period, and of course, the movement, movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement, the environmental movement, and others have been able to push him in a certain direction, and so I like some of the things that, when it comes to domestic policy, I like some of the things that Biden is saying. First of all, we all have to be grateful that he is going to try to solve this problem of the pandemic.
Right. That he's not ignoring it. Is basically, we finally got a president who's acknowledging the deaths, acknowledging the severity, and is prepared to put things in
Right.
place that could fight it, not
That's
ignore
right.
science.
That's right. He's not ignoring the science. And when we can debate, and I agree with some of the critics that he could probably do a lot more instead of just having 1 million a day vaccinated. We can sort of push for more people to be vaccinated, probably 2 million a day. That would be.
But is that possible? Is that realistic? The problem is,
A word. I'm sorry.
well, I was saying, is it, because in the end, we're dealing with issues of manufacturing. We're
Yeah.
dealing with issues of, for the purpose of the distribution, having the folks available to actually administer. I know that it's interesting because I was watching this yesterday in Dallas, where they were trying to target African American communities where the numbers are higher of infection rates and deaths, and Texas tried to stop it. And I think they're still embroiled in this issue, where we're really getting into the racism or the issues of that in distribution of who's going to be in line, who gets in line first for this.
Yeah.
And it's ugly how it's playing out in some cases.
Yes. There, so few people have been vaccinated at this point, and we have this crisis now, like in New York City, where the mayor has to close the vaccination centers, 23 of them, because he said we're just running out of vaccine. Well, we need to sort of get that vaccine out there, and you can use the Defense Production Act to do a whole bunch of things, including trying to get the corporations here, the pharmaceutical corporations, to sort of put out more vaccine. I think it's sort of the problem of having these pharmaceutical companies sort of in charge of this. And I think that, we need some really government pressure on them to do a lot better. In addition, there are more vaccines on the way, right? I mean, more companies coming out with vaccines. Johnson & Johnson has one, and I'm saying that's sort of a one-shot vaccine. So I think there are the supply side we definitely have to work on. But what I say, the million a day is sort of a low bar because we're almost there, 1 million a day.
As far as vaccines being
that's right, giving out vaccines. That's right, almost 1 million a day. So, I heard people like Sanjay Gupta and others say, well, what Biden's doing is sort of lowballing. I mean, we need to sort of raise that. And I've heard others in the medical field also make that argument. So I think, and he got angry when he was asked that question, by the way, last week.
Biden was.
The press. I'm sorry?
Biden was.
Yes, Biden got very angry about that. Well, he was clearly annoyed when someone said that, 1 million a day, don't you think you should raise it up a little? And his response was, come on, man,
Well, he lost his cool in the debates, right? We know that.
Yes.
You can get Joe mad.
Yes, you can. Not he wasn't he wasn't disgraceful like Trump when he gets angry, but I mean,
right.
The point is that people are saying, let's push harder, and so I applaud essentially the effort what he's doing. I just think he need to raise us up a little higher.
Yeah, well, at that rate, 1 million a day, and in the cases where people need 2 shots, we wouldn't be able to inoculate or vaccinate the entire American population within a year, right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
So that's the problem. I mean, we haven't even dealt with this, which is there are going to be people who don't want to be vaccinated. There are anti-vax folks, and we have to hit that 70% mark that Fauci has talked about. But Yeah, it does seem a problem. I mean, and this was something Bill Gates was supposed to be working on, right? This notion of getting manufacturing ready, so when the vaccine was discovered or created, that we would have the machinery in place to be able to make it fast enough to create enough doses to take care of folks. People don't know this. I'm a young, obviously I'm not the tail end of the baby boom, but even in World War II, the FDR administration struggled with getting manufacturers to convert from their peacetime, manufacturing cars to then go into military,
War production.
construction.
Yeah.
And most of it was because the fear that they weren't going to make a profit. Well, of course, we know now they did so well that we never got rid of the military industrial complex ever since World War II,
No.
and they kind of run things now where I forget what the number is, like half of every tax dollar goes to the military. But this is the case as well, because it's a peculiar market that you're in, where you're creating something that once you've made it, and everybody's got it, there will be no need for it again,
Right.
supposedly. We don't know this, of course, now with all of these things that are, the way it's changing in Europe, whether they're going to have to keep, reinventing vaccinations and changing it over time.
Mhm.
But it takes cajoling, and it takes a presidential act. I don't know what you have to do. Where can we depend on private business to do the right thing? Do we have to basically step in and whatever you want to nationalize the pharmaceutical companies? That would scare people. That's socialism. That's
Yeah, and Biden would never do that. But
yeah, exactly. Hold on, it's 1:29, so I want to just say, this is LaGuardia Webrita, WLGR. The show is What's Going On. My guest. I'm the host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guest is Dr. Clarence Taylor, who's a graduate of Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center, and taught at Baruch and the CUNY Graduate Center, and has published many books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 20th Century. And we're here to talk a little bit about the post-Biden election, inauguration, insurrection on January 6th, and how we're moving forward. We talked a little bit about this before the show started, and I don't know, because I'm sitting here when I saw Jim Crow. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in for a minute about the filibuster and what's going on now with the Senate, where it's a 50-50 Senate, but Vice President Harris is the deciding vote in a tie. But the filibuster still exists, and most people don't know that what the filibuster is. It's the ability of one side to continue holding the floor, not allowing business to go forward, and a lot of times by just wasting time, reading. People have done all kinds of, read the Bible to the Senate or whatever it is. The most famous, even though it's not real, is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Right, where he takes the floor and he tries to stay awake, and he eventually collapses. And there it makes the filibuster look good, but we've come to find out, now that we're really looking at history, that the filibuster is actually the product of Jim Crow policies, right?
That is correct. And Southern segregationists used it to block civil rights legislation on several occasions. So the filibuster sort of reminds me of Biden's speech about unity, and how this is really not going to work. It's sort of a pipe dream. Because the filibuster is really about power. And clearly, the party that's now in the minority said, look, we want to hold on to this because we are going to oppose all this legislation that he's going to come out with. Now, if he's still talking about unity, what is he willing to give up for that unity? What is he willing to give up to make a compromise? And so some of us who are more left and progressive are sort of fearful. So you may have these bold initiatives. He's coming out and saying all the right things, but what's going to happen when he is attempting to get a bill across? Now, the $190 trillion package that he wants to propose to fight COVID and the economic disparity that has resulted because of the coronavirus. Even the more moderate Republicans are saying, forget that. That's too much at this point. So he had that phone call with Susan Collins and I believe Mitt Romney were on there, and their response was, no, we're not going to support anything like that. So the question then is, okay, so what will he have? What will he do? What will they accept? And what will the president accept? So yes, I think unity is a great objective when people are willing to work in unity, right?
Right.
Right. But, at this point, I don't see that. Like I said, Trumpism is not dead. It's still alive. So the vast majority of Republicans are not going down that road. I heard someone even who said this morning talking about a conviction in the Senate. He said, you need 17 Republicans. He said, you can't even get 7.
Right.
Let alone 17. So I think that was one of the things that's striking me about Biden. And he's insisting that he is not going to use power at this point and forget about the Republican opposition and use the Democratic majority. So he doesn't want to do that at this point. So, I'm saying that, at which point is he going to use it? And how much are we going to lose? So, yeah. So, I think that's one of the big question marks about Biden and his administration. But I would say that I do like some of Biden's picks, and when it comes to in the environment, right? I think in terms of, when it comes to the Attorney General, well, I have some questions about Merrick Gardner, I believe that's his name. But some of the other people around him are pretty good. So, there is, I think, some attempt to and progressives, but the foreign policy aspect, to me, doesn't make it. He's already said that he is not going to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan. So that war will continue. He already said that he is not going to move the capital Jerusalem. He's not going to
move it back.
Turn that back. That's right. In addition, those things are sort of as a progressive person on the left. Those are sort of bothersome about Biden.
Foreign policy.
Yeah, foreign policy. I think is certain aspects of foreign policy. Yeah, no doubt he's getting rid of the nationalism that Trump and his crew
America
pushed.
first. America first.
Yeah, well, American nationalism, right? And Trump said, I'm a nationalist.
Right. The populist and national. It's interesting because this morning one of the headlines was, folks who can't pay their mortgage. And we know that in New York City, I think the number is up to like $1 billion in back rent that hasn't been paid. So, there are the physical symptoms and the strain that has the whole pandemic has put on our healthcare system. But now it's like you said before, the economic strain, and it's disconcerting because the Republicans were pretty freewheel spending during the Trump administration. I mean, they drove up the national debt again. And in the beginning of the pandemic, I was, I keep trying to figure out, like, okay, where is this money coming from? Except obviously people selling T-bills to the Chinese or whatever it is. But now again, we're still not out of it. And in many cases, some of the policies that were put in place, the bills are coming due. I mean, I haven't paid my student loan in a year because they told me not to. They told me you don't have to. And though my wife would have liked me to put it down, I said, well, wouldn't that money be better off if I spend it in the economy? I mean, isn't that the idea why the government doesn't want? I don't know why they didn't want me to pay it. I guess because they thought I couldn't. But my thinking is, I'll just spend it. And, it's, a building. I mean, around here, if you're trying to renovate your home or anything like that, you can't get anybody on the phone. So there's money. People there are jobs, but then there's the all the other folks who basically, can't pay their rent, can't pay their mortgages. All that's going to come to. I mean, it's very reminiscent of what 2007 looked like what
Right.
we're facing. And the long-term effects of this. I mean, they talked about it. It took Obama, basically his entire administration, to dig us out of what was the tail end of Bush Jr.'s presidency as far as economics. Again, President Biden has already said he will not run again. So he's got 4 years to do this. But again, if you have a hostile Republican minority in the Senate who's going to be filibustering any kind of package you're trying to push through, or just in general not supporting it, something's got to give.
Yes, I agree. And even if he decides to run again, I mean, that's not really doesn't matter. And the question is that if they don't do anything now,
yeah,
I'm sure many people will agree with me that we will have another Trump. We will have someone in office that may be another right-wing populist.
Right.
In office. Because, yes.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to, the administration is not going to speak to the desperate needs of, millions of people in this country. We don't see this as something that we really need to address at this very moment. Then they are essentially digging their graves.
Right.
And I think that was part of the problems with the Democratic Party. That the needs of working people in this country.
Yet they were ignored.
Yes, they were ignored by the Democratic Party. You go back and you look at the Clinton era, and you see his push for deregulation and the whole neoliberal project of, quote, ending welfare as we know it. Essentially attacking poor people. And Clinton was very good at doing this. And many speeches talking about irresponsible fathers and so forth, and changing the subject where we can sort of demonize poor, and he demonized poor people. It wasn't just Clinton, it was many council that was organized in the late 1980s in order to stop the progressives from emerging and gaining a foothold in the Democratic Party. And so we walked away from really strong solutions, building and making sure that labor laws were on the books and enforced, and making sure organized labor was able to prosper and expand. Making sure that we did have a system that was of welfare that was going to help many people in this country, in particular women. Many women were on welfare, and they used that. They didn't stay on it long, but nevertheless, they were using that in situations where there was domestic abuse, and they wanted to escape that domestic abuse. So they would use the welfare system, and so sort of ending this system, ending all types of services to working class people, and pushing privatization has had devastating impact. And that's why we had Trump in the first place. I mean, one of the reasons we had Trump in the first place. The other, as I mentioned earlier,
revolution from the middle working class, whatever, the working class. Right. By the way, are we there yet? We're almost at the last quarter hour, so if there are any questions that folks want to ask, if we have any viewers. We always state that we get a lot of viewership in the from the archive. So it's a Monday. I know it's Monday afternoon. So see who we get. Okay. But open it up to any questions. Somebody is saying, when it comes to Biden's executive order to advance racial equality, where do you think that his priorities should be? In your opinion, is the order laid out in a way that effectively begins to address systematic inequalities, or is it more of an empty gesture? What do you think about that?
Well, I think Biden is timid when it comes to really addressing racial injustice, racial inequality in the United States. I think what he really needs to do is, as I pointed out earlier, I mean, we need a strong economic package to help people who are desperate, because most of those folks are Black and brown people who are in this situation, who are losing their jobs. There's these essential workers who are out there risking their lives. So when he, talked about, what was it, I think $1,400.
I think it was 2,000 at one point.
Well, that's what Bernie Sanders and other progressives have been pushing for 2,000. And
first Trump pushed it. Interestingly enough,
we know he didn't mean it. So,
right. So 1,400 on top of the 600 that was already sent. By the way, if I was supposed to get 600, I don't know where that money is, because by the time it got to me, there wasn't much left. Not that I don't need it. I would rather see that money going to the folks who need it. So I don't need it, but again, just out there.
Yes, but yes, and we do have lots of people who unfortunately do. I have a niece. I'm not going to talk about. Well,
right.
She's in a very tight situation, and going to food banks. And
right.
So, we have to help her out. And so, I mean, it's a really sort of desperate situation. We've never seen anything like this in my lifetime.
Well, I think I don't know whether it's 50% or 50 million that are taking advantage of food banks right now in the United States.
That's right.
And what's kind of fascinating is I always remember we talk about this. I mean, when things are going well, that the average American was one paycheck away from homelessness. That's what people always said, and that people don't have prudent reserves. I mean, I've tried to create prudent reserves all my life. You start with 3 months, but ideally, the whatever you want to call it, the penultimate would be the 18 months, which is just about what you would have needed to get through this if you'd lost your job. 18 months worth of, whatever you take home, to keep everything going until you could get your job back. I mean, we're not, I don't know if we're not at 18 months yet, but it's looking like it.
Right.
But most Americans weren't there. Most Americans basically were waiting for, each paycheck kept them, going. And when they lost those jobs, everything plummeted. The only thing that kept them from homelessness is, passing this legislation to not force them into eviction, and forgiving mortgages and all these other different policies. But yeah, my concern is when is when it ends, what happens? How does that all shake out? We right now, interestingly enough, we're here at CUNY. We should talk about the college a little bit, university, because though obviously the college is dependent on both on the city, the state, and the federal government to do its job. Most of our students are now, for the first time, and we used to tout how you get out of CUNY and 85% of them didn't have student debt. That's not the case anymore. Right now, there are students who, for the spring term and for the fall term, have unpaid tuition, and that unpaid tuition does not allow them to register for courses, so now it's going to have a negative impact on enrollment. And not to mention graduation rates, retention. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And again, I don't see how. I mean, there's always been talk about, forgiveness and student loans, but actually exists outside of the federal student loan programs. You know what I mean? The state and federal programs. So again, I don't know how that's all going to shake out.
No. Unfortunately, millions of people are sort of facing this situation. Well, one way you could do it is that you have to make CUNY and other public institutions free. Get rid of tuition. I attended CUNY free. I paid for every semester. I paid $36. They call that a consolidation fee. And I entered in 1970.
Right. This was before open admissions, right?
Well, actually, I was the first. I entered on the first class of open admissions.
Wow. And you paid $36.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, but before open admissions, I mean, it was free.
Right.
It isn't until the mid 1970s when New York experienced the financial crisis that the CUNY went to a tuition-based institution. So, but yeah, we need to attempt to go back to free college.
Right.
Free public colleges. Tuition free. Yes.
Right. Well, it's kind of fascinating because I think of other things like there's a Chinese national who's a photographer, and he lives in West Harlem, and he was photographing, and he had a picture of these families getting onto the back of the bus, through the back door. Friends from Miami who were looking at the picture, I'm saying, do you know the ramifications of this photograph? And some of them figured it out, and we got into this whole thing about people not paying. And I said, like, the question you should really ask yourself is, why is public transportation? Why do they have to pay for that?
Yes.
It's like, you understand? Like, here's a family that's to decide between going home on the bus or eating. Why do they have to make that decision? Which, again, I think about this for our students' sakes who pay. Sometimes they don't come to school because they don't have the money
for transportation
to take the train, and they're not going to get arrested for jumping it's mad. And that's why ASAP, which is a program that gives kids, Metro cards, is one of the reasons they're so successful. The numbers are higher because those kids don't have to deal with that issue. And but when I talk like this, I'm like a lefty socialist.
but the reality that existed before. I remember as a student in what was then called junior high schools,
right?
Because my institution was a mile or two away, getting a free transportation card.
Well, that's still the case until you're in high school. Through high school, you can go to school. You'll get a card.
Right.
whether you need it or not. I mean,
So, yeah. So the question is, why don't we do this for students in college?
yeah,
And I think that, and along with the free tuition, really important. People say, well, you're just giving things away, right? People just want free. The phrase is free stuff, right?
yeah, they don't want to ever pay, right?
Right.
They don't.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, think about educating the citizens of the city, how beneficial that is. I was educated in New York City, well, and I gave to the city. Right, I worked at public institutions,
Paid
and
taxes.
right,
Yeah.
and paid taxes,
You were the engine of the economy, fixing up your home, raising children.
That's right.
And
Who attended public schools, right? So,
yeah, exactly. Well,
so
I think we might be eating our tail at this point.
yeah,
And, but I was going to say, the administration is it's in its first 100 days. And so, I mean, my idea of bringing you back after the inauguration was to check in. Little did I know how much there was going to be to talk about. I think I'd like you back after the first 100 days, and we can talk about that off camera or off audio to set that up. Because, I mean, I guess since the Kennedy administration that the first 100 days has always been kind of a way to take the temperature of a presidency. So let's see how the Biden administration can cut these deals. Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny because I've always said that people when Obama was elected, I said, well, this is one man in one role in the executive. Without the Congress, without the Senate, there's only so much you can do. And though now here we got a president who has a small majority in the Congress, barely a majority in the Senate, and but it's the first. Let's see what happens in those first 100 days. What can be accomplished, and get a taste of his style.
Yeah, well, I think one thing, as I said, one thing about Republicans, they know how to use power.
Well, I was impressed because the Trump presidency, the president wielded a lot of power. Of course, you don't care what people think. If you don't care what people think, then you can pretty much do whatever you want. But most presidents are elected.
Yeah.
Administration.
But we're talking about wielding power for the benefit of the vast majority of people in this country, right?
And that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Any last things you want to say? Well, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm hopeful about the Biden administration. I mentioned this thing about unity. I think reality may slap him in the face very soon. And the question is, what actions is he going to take after he finds out that they're not really interested in unity because Trumpism isn't really dead and so forth. And I think also we need to watch to see the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party that's growing. And see how seriously they are going to be taken in this administration in terms of policies, right? So that is going to be interesting to watch. I think progressives have played an extremely important role in getting Biden elected, right?
Right.
So let's say, I know I keep hearing him saying that, well, I defeated the progressives, I won, but that's not really building unity with your progressive party wing. Also, if you really want to build unity, you got to build it also within your own party,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's to be seen.
Yeah.
But it's 1:57, and I just want to thank again our guest today, Dr. Clarence Taylor. graduate both of Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center, who taught at Baruch College and CUNY Graduate Center, and has published many books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 21st Century. Thanks for being on, and we'll try to set up a time for you to come back after the first 100 days, which I guess should be sometime in April, right?
Yep.
And we'll see again how we'll check in on the president's report card. And
Okay. Be watching, huh?
Yeah. And I've been your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on What's Going On, LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. Thanks for watching and listening. And Mr. Pope, can you please take us out? Thanks.